In the spring of 2024, a decisive moment arrived that would reshape the landscape of global automotive trade. The United States government made a dramatic announcement that sent shockwaves through the international electric vehicle market. Sweeping new tariffs targeting Chinese-manufactured goods would take effect, with electric cars bearing the brunt of these unprecedented trade measures. The policy, set to roll out in phases between 2024 and 2026, represents one of the most aggressive trade actions in recent memory. At its core lies a staggering increase in duties on Chinese electric vehicles, from an already substantial 25% all the way to a full 100%. When combined with America's standard 2.5% baseline import duty, the total tariff burden on Chinese EVs entering the United States now stands at an eye-watering 102.5%. This effectively doubles the price of these vehicles before they even reach American dealerships. But the United States wouldn't act alone for long. Across the Atlantic, the European Union watched these developments closely and prepared its own response. After conducting an extensive 8-month examination of the Chinese electric vehicle industry, European officials reached a conclusion that would have far-reaching consequences. On July 4th, the EU officially implemented temporary countervailing duties targeting Chinese EV imports, a measure designed to level what Brussels perceived as an unfair playing field. Yet in this high-stakes game of international trade policy, an unexpected victim emerged from the shadows. Japan, a nation that built its post-war economic miracle on automotive excellence, now finds itself in an increasingly precarious position. As Western powers erect barriers against Chinese electric vehicles, the ripple effects are creating a crisis for Japanese automakers that few saw coming. This raises critical questions that will define the future of the global auto industry. How will Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers navigate this wall of Western tariffs? What strategies will they employ to maintain their momentum in international markets? And perhaps most intriguingly, why has Japan emerged as the biggest casualty in a trade war that doesn't even directly target Japanese companies? Before we dive deeper into these questions, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. We're committed to bringing you in-depth analysis of the forces shaping our global economy, and your subscription ensures you won't miss any of our upcoming investigations. Now let's explore how we arrived at this pivotal moment in automotive history. The rise of Chinese EVs and Europe's growing alarm. The ascent of Chinese electric vehicles in global markets didn't happen overnight. It was the result of strategic planning, massive investment, and a clear competitive edge that traditional automakers struggled to match. Price has been the defining weapon in China's EV arsenal. Chinese manufacturers have consistently offered electric vehicles at price points that established brands simply cannot compete with, making advanced electric mobility accessible to middle-class consumers across multiple continents. This affordability revolution has transformed market dynamics in ways that are still unfolding. The numbers tell a compelling story. Across 28 European nations, pure battery electric vehicles manufactured in China now represent roughly 1/5 of all newly registered EVs, a remarkable penetration for what are essentially foreign imports entering some of the world's most established automotive markets. The year 2023 marked a watershed moment. Chinese automakers exported a total of 4.6 million vehicles globally, an achievement that would have seemed impossible just a decade earlier. Within that figure, approximately 900,000 units were new energy vehicles destined for European markets, accounting for nearly 57% of China's total NEV exports. Europe had become the single most important destination for Chinese electric vehicle ambitions. Meanwhile, Europe's own automotive sector was showing signs of strain. According to figures compiled by the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, total car sales across the continent in 2023 reached 1.09 million units, but this represented a 2.6% decline compared to the previous year. More troubling still, sales dropped across 3/4 of Europe's major markets, suggesting systemic challenges rather than isolated difficulties. For European policymakers and automotive executives, the implications were clear and concerning. Chinese EVs weren't just competing in European markets, they were rapidly gaining ground while domestic manufacturers struggled to maintain their footing. Brussels developed a specific theory to explain this market shift. According to EU analysis, the competitive advantage enjoyed by Chinese electric vehicles stems primarily from substantial government subsidies that effectively lower production costs and enable aggressive pricing strategies. These state-backed support mechanisms, European officials argued, created an artificially tilted playing field that no amount of innovation or efficiency could overcome. As affordable Chinese EVs flooded European showrooms and digital marketplaces, the impact on traditional manufacturers became increasingly severe. Within a remarkably short 2-year period, numerous European automotive companies filed formal complaints against their Chinese competitors, alleging unfair trade practices and calling for protective measures. The European Union finally responded with action. An official anti-dumping investigation targeting Chinese electric vehicles was launched, signaling that Brussels was prepared to move beyond rhetoric toward concrete policy intervention. After 8 months of detailed examination, reviewing cost structures, pricing strategies, and subsidy mechanisms, the EU reached its verdict. In June 2024, European officials passed a resolution implementing substantial new tariffs on Chinese-manufactured electric vehicles. The duty rates would vary depending on the specific manufacturer and cooperation level during the investigation, ranging from 17.4% at the lower end to as high as 38.1% for some companies. But this may be only the beginning. EU officials have made clear that additional investigations into Chinese EV exports to Europe will continue in the coming months. And there's a very real possibility that these temporary measures could be transformed into permanent trade policy. The complete picture becomes even more striking when we consider existing duties. The European Union already maintained a 10% baseline tariff on Chinese automobiles before these new measures were introduced. When you stack the new countervailing duties on top of this existing rate, some Chinese electric vehicles now face combined tariff burdens approaching 50% of their value. Industry analysts have attempted to model what this means in practical terms. Their projections suggest that for every 10% increase in automotive tariffs, Chinese exports to Europe could decline by approximately 25%. If this relationship holds true, the current tariff regime could trigger a massive contraction in the flow of Chinese vehicles to European markets. The financial stakes are enormous. Experts estimate that such a reduction in export volume could strip more than $4 billion in revenue from Chinese automotive companies, a figure representing roughly 25% of their current European trade activity. For companies that have invested heavily in European market development, this represents a devastating setback that could take years to recover from. For the European Union itself, however, there's a silver lining in these protectionist clouds. These new tariff measures are projected to generate more than €2 billion in additional government revenue, funds that could theoretically be reinvested in European industrial competitiveness or green technology development. Yet despite this potential windfall and the political appeal of protecting domestic industry, the EU's tariff strategy has encountered unexpected resistance, not from Beijing, but from within Europe itself. Germany's dilemma, caught between protection and retaliation. Among European nations, Germany has emerged as the most prominent skeptic of aggressive tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. This isn't ideological opposition or naive faith in free trade. It's cold calculation based on hard economic reality. The German automotive industry maintains a relationship with China that can only be described as symbiotic, perhaps even dependent. In 2023, nearly 1/3 of all sales generated by German car manufacturers came from the Chinese market. This isn't a minor revenue stream, it's a fundamental pillar supporting one of Germany's most important industrial sectors. The exposure is particularly acute for Germany's prestigious automotive brands. Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz have each established enormous market presence in China, selling millions of vehicles to Chinese consumers who view German engineering as the gold standard of automotive quality. These companies have invested billions in Chinese production facilities, dealer networks, and research centers. So when Brussels announced plans to impose steep tariffs on Chinese EVs, executives in Stuttgart, Munich, and Wolfsburg immediately recognized the danger. Their concern wasn't just about fair competition or trade philosophy, it was about the very real possibility of Chinese retaliation. If Beijing decided to respond to European tariffs by targeting German automotive imports or imposing regulatory obstacles on German manufacturers operating in China, The consequences would be catastrophic. German car companies could see their access to the world's largest automotive market severely restricted, or their products subjected to retaliatory duties that would cripple sales. Germany isn't alone in its apprehension. Other European nations with significant economic ties to Chinese automotive supply chains have also expressed serious reservations about the EU's confrontational approach. Sweden, home to Volvo, now Chinese-owned, and a substantial automotive components industry, has openly criticized the tariff policy. Hungarian officials, mindful of major Chinese automotive investments in their country, have similarly voiced opposition, arguing that the measures could damage their emerging role as a manufacturing hub connecting European and Asian automotive industries. Perhaps most notably, Norway, despite having the world's highest electric vehicle adoption rate and the most mature EV market globally, has declined to align itself with the EU's tariff regime. This stance is particularly significant given Norway's environmental commitments and the fact that affordable Chinese EVs have helped the country achieve its ambitious electrification goals. China's counterpunch has really been a multi-front response. Facing these coordinated Western efforts to limit Chinese electric vehicle market access, Beijing has made it clear it won't just accept these restrictions without pushing back. China's response has been, well, strategic, targeted, and definitely designed to maximize pain for European industries that have significant exposure to the Chinese market. The first part of China's counterattack is focused on European gasoline-powered vehicles. Chinese authorities have started implementing measures to restrict imports of conventional European cars, creating all sorts of bureaucratic obstacles and regulatory hurdles. This makes it much harder for European manufacturers to maintain their presence in China's still substantial traditional vehicle market. And the numbers here are, honestly, pretty substantial. In 2023, China imported about 1.3 million gasoline-powered vehicles, with roughly 500,000 of those coming from European manufacturers. If we conservatively estimate an average vehicle price of $40,000, restrictions on these imports could potentially strip $20 billion in annual revenue from European automakers. That's far more than the value of Chinese electric vehicle exports that actually triggered this whole trade conflict in the first place. But, China's response doesn't stop with automotive products. In a move that caught a lot of observers by surprise, Beijing launched an anti-dumping investigation targeting European pork exports to China. Now, this might seem totally unrelated to electric vehicles, but it actually represents a pretty calculated escalation that hits European agriculture where it hurts most. China represents an absolutely critical market for global pork producers. Chinese consumers purchase and consume more than 50 million tons of pork every year, accounting for nearly half of global pork consumption. European farmers and meat processors have long relied on Chinese demand to absorb their production and maintain profitability. European nations have historically served as important suppliers in this trade relationship. If China's anti-dumping investigation concludes that European pork is being sold below fair market value and they implement countervailing duties, the competitive position of EU pork in the Chinese market would deteriorate dramatically. Industry specialists have tried to forecast the impact, and their estimates suggest that anti-dumping duties on European pork could trigger a decline of 30 to 40% in EU market share within China. That could potentially result in European producers losing access to one of their most valuable export destinations entirely. This multi-sector approach to retaliation really shows Beijing's sophisticated understanding of European economic vulnerabilities. By targeting both automotive and agricultural sectors, China ensures that the political coalition supporting tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles starts to fracture as different industries face their own crisis. Beyond Europe, China's alternative market strategy might actually be the most important part of their response to Western tariffs. It's not just defensive. It's about aggressively pursuing new markets that can absorb Chinese electric vehicle production, no matter what Europe or America does with trade barriers. The reality is, even if Chinese manufacturers were totally locked out of European and American markets tomorrow, the global electric vehicle revolution would keep going, and Chinese companies would still find plenty of willing customers. Chinese electric vehicles have already established dominant positions in markets across Southeast Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and other regions where price sensitivity is high and brand loyalty to traditional manufacturers is honestly a lot lower than in Western markets. Southeast Asia is probably the clearest example of this alternative market strategy. In Thailand, which has become a crucial battleground for electric vehicle market share, Chinese EVs accounted for a staggering 80% of all new energy vehicle sales in 2023. This isn't just competitive success, it's pretty much near total market dominance. A big reason for this overwhelming market share is that Thai domestic manufacturers haven't really shown much interest or capability in developing their own electric vehicle brands. This vacuum has created a huge opportunity for Chinese automakers to become the default choice for Thai consumers looking to switch to electric mobility. Latin America is showing similar opportunities. Brazil, which is ranked as the world's sixth largest automotive market, has quickly become the single largest individual export destination for Chinese electric vehicles. The growth here has just been extraordinary. In April 2024 alone, China exported more than 40,000 pure electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles to Brazil, a 13-fold increase compared to the same month the previous year. This explosive growth really shows both the hunger for affordable EVs in developing markets and just how effective Chinese manufacturers are at meeting that demand. But Chinese companies aren't satisfied with just exporting vehicles from domestic factories. They're making significant investments in local production capacity, which will make them even more competitive and harder to push out with future trade measures. BYD, China's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, announced in early 2024 that it would invest $1.3 billion to build a major electric vehicle production facility in Indonesia. That's one of the largest foreign automotive investments in Southeast Asian history and really signals BYD's long-term commitment to the region. Great Wall Motors is also speeding up its Southeast Asian expansion strategy. The company has revealed plans to build new manufacturing plants in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, with production expected to start either this year or next. These factories will let Great Wall produce vehicles specifically designed for regional preferences, while avoiding import duties. Changan Automobile has joined this manufacturing expansion as well, announcing a production base in Thailand with an anticipated start date in 2025. When it's up and running, this facility will let Changan serve not just the Thai market, but potentially the entire Southeast Asian region. This shift toward localized production is a fundamental change in Chinese automotive strategy. Instead of treating Southeast Asia, Latin America, and other developing regions as just export markets, Chinese manufacturers are building the infrastructure to become real regional players, deeply rooted in local economies. If Western tariff barriers make European and American markets harder or less profitable to access, Chinese EV manufacturers have already shown they have viable alternatives. Southeast Asia, in particular, looks ready to absorb significant Chinese production capacity and investment. And honestly, this is exactly where Japan's problems start. Japan's automotive crisis is all about losing ground in its traditional strongholds. For decades, Japanese automotive brands were the gold standard for reliability, efficiency, and value. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi built global empires on the back of well-engineered, affordable vehicles that consumers trusted almost without question. Nowhere was Japanese automotive dominance more complete than in Southeast Asia. Japanese manufacturers didn't just sell cars in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. They actually shaped the entire regional automotive culture. Japanese brands have held commanding market share positions across Southeast Asia for generations. This success came from sophisticated localization strategies that went far beyond simple export operations. Japanese automakers set up manufacturing facilities throughout the region, creating jobs, transferring technology, and really integrating themselves into local economies. This localized production approach brought a lot of advantages. It cut production and transportation costs, minimized currency exchange risks, and showed long-term commitment to regional development. Japanese companies also invested heavily in developing vehicle models specifically engineered for Southeast Asian conditions. These weren't just global models with a few tweaks. They were ground-up designs that took into account local road infrastructure, tropical climate challenges, fuel quality differences, and consumer preferences. This attention to regional needs meant vehicles that were exceptionally well suited for their environment and remarkably durable under local conditions. These thoughtful strategies, sustained over decades, made Japanese automotive brands seem almost unbeatable in Southeast Asian markets. But now, that dominance is under serious threat, and the danger isn't coming from European or American competitors. It's coming from China. The critical vulnerability for the Japanese automotive industry is its slow and, honestly, inadequate response to the electric vehicle revolution. While Chinese manufacturers were making big investments in battery technology, electric powertrains, and EV-specific manufacturing, Japanese companies mostly stuck with hybrid technology and small improvements to traditional internal combustion engines. This hesitation was partly cultural. Japanese automakers built their success on continuous refinement, not disruptive innovation, and partly due to the Japanese government's failure to give clear policy direction and support for electric vehicle development. The consequences of this lag are now painfully clear in global market share data. Just a few years ago, Japanese automotive brands controlled about 25% of the worldwide car market, a really commanding position built over decades. But as electric vehicles have moved from niche products to mainstream options, Japanese market share has collapsed to just 12% globally. That's one of the most dramatic declines in industrial competitiveness in modern economic history. Losing more than half your global market share in just a few years isn't slow decline, it's a crisis. Meanwhile, Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers are seeing the exact opposite. Chinese EV brands are expanding rapidly into Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, exactly the markets where Japanese brands have always been strongest. This sets up a pretty devastating scenario for Japanese automakers. As Western tariffs make European and American markets less attractive for Chinese manufacturers, these companies will inevitably redirect their focus and resources toward markets that remain open and receptive. Southeast Asia is right at the top of that list. Chinese manufacturers already have major competitive advantages in these markets. Lower production costs, more advanced electric vehicle technology, better battery performance, and government support for international expansion. If these companies now focus all their attention on Southeast Asia, building more factories, expanding dealer networks, and customizing products even more for local preferences, Japanese brands will face competition that's more intense than anything they've seen before. The cost advantages alone could be decisive. Chinese manufacturers operating from local production facilities in Southeast Asia will be able to offer electric vehicles at price points that Japanese hybrids and traditional vehicles just can't match. For price-sensitive consumers in developing markets, the choice will become more and more obvious. Japanese automotive companies are now in a really tough strategic position. They've fallen behind in electric vehicle technology and now have to catch up while also defending their traditional strongholds against an aggressive, well-funded, and technologically advanced competitor. As this complex trade conflict continues to evolve, it's worth stepping back for a moment to consider who actually benefits from this current path of tariffs, restrictions, and retaliation. For European consumers, the answer is, well, pretty clearly negative. Those who would rather buy affordable Chinese electric vehicles now face much higher prices because of tariff-inflated costs. This slows down the shift to electric mobility, makes sustainable transportation less accessible, and honestly, reduces consumer choice, all in the name of protecting domestic industry. Chinese manufacturers, of course, face some obvious challenges too.